The Hound of the Baskervilles. Chapter 6. Baskerville Hall. The day we were to depart for Devonshire had arrived, and Sir Henry Baskerville and Dr. Mortimer were ready. As arranged, Mr. Sherlock Holmes drove me to the station, where he imparted his final instructions. "Watson," he said, his voice measured, "I shall refrain from influencing your observations with theories or suspicions. Your sole task is to meticulously record all facts, no matter how seemingly insignificant, and leave the interpretation to me." "What kind of facts should I be looking for?" I inquired. "Anything that might have a bearing, however indirect, on the case," he replied. "Pay particular attention to the relationships between young Baskerville and his neighbors, and any fresh details regarding the death of Sir Charles. I've conducted some preliminary investigations, but the results, I fear, have been inconclusive. One thing seems certain, though. Mr. James Desmond, the next heir, is an elderly gentleman of amicable disposition, ruling him out as a potential perpetrator. We can effectively dismiss him from our calculations. Our focus should shift to those who will be directly surrounding Sir Henry Baskerville on the moor." "Wouldn't it be prudent to eliminate the Barrymore couple from our list of suspects?" I suggested. "Not at all, Watson," Holmes countered, his gaze sharp. "That would be a grave error. If they are innocent, such an action would be a cruel injustice. And if they are guilty, we would forfeit any chance of holding them accountable. We must keep them on our list of suspects. Then there's the groom at the hall, if I recall correctly. 2 moorland farmers. Dr. Mortimer, whose honesty I believe to be unquestionable. His wife, about whom we know nothing. The naturalist Stapleton, and his sister, who is said to be a captivating young woman. Mr. Frankland of Laughter Hall, another unknown factor, and a handful of other neighbors. These individuals are your primary subjects of scrutiny." "I shall do my best," I assured him. "Are you armed, Watson?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "Yes, I deemed it prudent to carry a revolver." "Excellent," he said, his tone firm. "Keep your revolver close at hand, both day and night, and never let your guard down." Our companions were already waiting on the platform, having secured a first-class carriage. "We have no new developments to report," Dr. Mortimer stated in response to Holmes's inquiries. "I can say with certainty that we have not been followed in the last 2 days. We've been vigilant, and no one could have gone unnoticed. You've kept each other in sight at all times, I presume?" "Except yesterday afternoon," Mortimer replied. "I dedicate one day to leisure when I'm in town, and I spent it at the Museum of the College of Surgeons. And I went for a stroll in the park," Baskerville added. "We encountered no difficulties whatsoever." "Nonetheless, it was imprudent," Holmes stated, shaking his head, his expression grave. "Sir Henry, I implore you, do not venture out alone. A grave misfortune could befall you if you do. Did you manage to retrieve your other boot?" "No, sir. It's gone forever." "Indeed. That is quite intriguing. Well, farewell," he said, as the train began to pull away from the platform. "Remember, Sir Henry, one of the phrases from that peculiar old legend Dr. Mortimer shared with us. Avoid the moor during those hours of darkness when the powers of evil are most potent." As we departed, I looked back at the platform, now far behind, and saw Holmes's tall, austere figure standing motionless, his gaze fixed upon us. The journey was swift and pleasant, spent in getting to know my companions better, and indulging in playful interactions with Dr. Mortimer's spaniel. Within a few hours, the brown earth gave way to a reddish hue. Brick morphed into granite, and red cows grazed in well-hedged fields, where the lush grasses and abundant vegetation spoke of a richer, if more humid, climate. Young Baskerville peered out of the window with eager eyes, exclaiming with delight as he recognized the familiar features of the Devon countryside. "I've traveled far and wide since leaving this place, Dr. Watson," he said, but I've never encountered anything comparable." "I've never met a Devonshire man who didn't swear by his county," I remarked. "It's a matter of the breed of men as much as the county itself," Dr. Mortimer asserted. A glance at our friend here reveals the rounded head of the Celt, indicative of the Celtic enthusiasm and capacity for attachment. Poor Sir Charles had a very unique head, a blend of Gaelic and Ivernian characteristics. But you were quite young when you last saw Baskerville Hall, weren't you? I was a teenager at the time of my father's death and had never actually seen the hall, as he lived in a small cottage on the south coast. From there, I went directly to a friend in America. I assure you, Dr. Watson, it's as new to me as it is to you, and I'm incredibly eager to see the moor. Are you? Then your wish is easily granted, for there you have your first glimpse of the moor, Dr. Mortimer declared, pointing out the carriage window. Over the verdant squares of the fields and the low curve of a wood, a gray, melancholy hill rose in the distance. Its summit, jagged and strange, loomed dim and vague in the distance, resembling a fantastical landscape from a dream. Baskerville sat for an extended period, his gaze fixed upon it, and I could see in his eager face how much this first sight of that peculiar spot meant to him. This was the place where his ancestors had held sway for so long, leaving their mark upon the land. There he sat, clad in his tweed suit, with his American accent, in the corner of an ordinary railway carriage. Yet, as I observed his dark and expressive face, I felt more than ever how truly he was descended from that long line of high-blooded, fiery, and masterful men. There was pride, valor, and strength in his thick brows, his sensitive nostrils, and his large hazel eyes. If a difficult and dangerous quest awaited us on that forbidding moor, this was at least a comrade one could trust to share the risk, knowing he would face it with unwavering bravery. The train pulled to a halt at a small wayside station, and we all disembarked. Outside, beyond the low white fence, a wagonette with a pair of cobs awaited us. Our arrival was clearly a momentous occasion, as the station master and porters flocked around us to assist with our luggage. It was a charming, simple country spot, but I was surprised to notice two soldierly men in dark uniforms standing by the gate, leaning on their short rifles, casting keen glances at us as we passed. The coachman, a hard-faced, gnarled little fellow, saluted Sir Henry Baskerville, and within minutes we were speeding swiftly down the broad white road. Rolling pasture lands curved upward on either side of us, and old gabled houses peeked out from amid the thick green foliage. Yet behind the peaceful and sunlit countryside, there rose ever, dark against the evening sky, the long, gloomy curve of the moor, broken by the jagged and sinister hills. The wagonette swung round into a side road, and we curved upward through deep lanes, carved by centuries of wheels, high banks on either side heavy with dripping moss and fleshy hart's-tongue ferns. Bronzing bracken and mottled bramble glimmered in the light of the setting sun. Still steadily ascending, we crossed a narrow granite bridge and skirted a noisy stream that rushed swiftly down, foaming and roaring amid the gray boulders. Both road and stream wound up through a valley dense with scrub oak and fir. At every turn, Baskerville exclaimed with delight, looking eagerly around him and asking countless questions. To his eyes, all seemed beautiful, but to me, a tinge of melancholy pervaded the countryside, which bore so clearly the mark of the waning year. Yellow leaves carpeted the lanes and fluttered down upon us as we passed. The rattle of our wheels died away as we drove through drifts of rotting vegetation, sad gifts, as it seemed to me, for nature to throw before the carriage of the returning heir of the Baskervilles. "Hello!" cried Dr. Mortimer. "What is this?" A steep curve of heath-clad land, an outlying spur of the moor, lay before us. On the summit, hard and clear like an equestrian statue upon its pedestal, was a mounted soldier, dark and stern, his rifle poised ready over his forearm. He was watching the road along which we traveled. "What is this, Perkins?" asked Dr. Mortimer. Our driver half turned in his seat. "There's a convict escaped from Princetown, sir. He's been out 3 days now, and the warders watch every road and every station, but they've had no sight of him yet. The farmers about here don't like it, sir, and that's a fact." "Well, I understand they get £5 if they can give information." "Yes, sir, but the chance of £5 is but a poor thing compared to the chance of having your throat cut. You see, it isn't like any ordinary convict. This is a man that would stick at nothing." "Who is he, then?" "It is Selden, the Notting Hill murderer." I remembered the case well, for it was one in which Holmes had taken an interest on account of the peculiar ferocity of the crime and the wanton brutality which had marked all the actions of the assassin. The commutation of his death sentence had been due to some doubts as to his complete sanity, so atrocious was his conduct. Our wagonette had topped a rise, and in front of us rose the huge expanse of the moor, mottled with gnarled and craggy cairns and towers. A cold wind swept down from it and set us shivering. Somewhere there, on that desolate plain, was lurking this fiendish man, hiding in a burrow like a wild beast, his heart full of malignancy against the whole race which had cast him out. It needed but this to complete the grim suggestiveness of the barren waste, the chilling wind, and the darkling sky. Even Baskerville fell silent and pulled his overcoat more closely around him. We had left the fertile country behind, and beneath us. We looked back on it now, the slanting rays of a low sun turning the streams to threads of gold and glowing on the red earth, new turned by the plough, and the broad tangle of the woodlands. The road in front of us grew bleaker and wilder over huge russet and olive slopes, sprinkled with giant boulders. Now and then we passed a moorland cottage, walled and roofed with stone, with no creeper to break its harsh outline. Suddenly we looked down into a cup-like depression, patched with stunted oaks and firs, which had been twisted and bent by the fury of years of storm. 2 high, narrow towers rose over the trees. The driver pointed with his whip. "Baskerville Hall," said he. Its master had risen and was staring with flushed cheeks and shining eyes. A few minutes later, we had reached the lodge gates, a maze of fantastic tracery in wrought iron, with weather-bitten pillars on either side, blotched with lichens and surmounted by the boar's heads of the Baskervilles. The lodge was a ruin of black granite and bared ribs of rafters, but facing it was a new building, half-constructed, the first fruit of Sir Charles's South African gold. Through the gateway we passed into the avenue, where the wheels were again hushed amid the leaves, and the old trees shot their branches in a somber tunnel over our heads. Baskerville shuddered as he looked up the long, dark drive to where the house glimmered like a ghost at the farther end. "Was it here?" he asked in a low voice. No. The yew alley is on the other side." The young heir glanced round with a gloomy face. "It's no wonder my uncle felt as if trouble were coming on him in such a place as this," said he. "It's enough to scare any man. I'll have a row of electric lamps up here inside of 6 months, and you won't know it again, with 1,000 candle-power Swan and Edison right here in front of the hall door." The avenue opened into a broad expanse of turf, and the house lay before us. In the fading light, I could see that the center was a heavy block of building from which a porch projected. The whole front was draped in ivy, with a patch clipped bare here and there, where a window or a coat of arms broke through the dark veil. From this central block rose the twin towers, ancient, crenellated, and pierced with many loopholes. To right and left of the turrets were more modern wings of black granite. A dull light shone through heavy mullioned windows, and from the high chimneys which rose from the steep, high-angled roof, there sprang a single black column of smoke. "Welcome, Sir Henry! Welcome to Baskerville Hall!" A tall man had stepped from the shadow of the porch to open the door of the wagonette. The figure of a woman was silhouetted against the yellow light of the hall. She came out and helped the man to hand down our bags. "You don't mind my driving straight home, Sir Henry?" said Dr. Mortimer. "My wife is expecting me." "Surely you will stay and have some dinner?" "No, I must go. I shall probably find some work awaiting me. I would stay to show you over the house, but Barrymore will be a better guide than I. Goodbye, and never hesitate night or day to send for me if I can be of service." The wheels died away down the drive while Sir Henry and I turned into the hall, and the door clanged heavily behind us. It was a fine apartment in which we found ourselves, large, lofty, and heavily raftered, with huge bulks of age-blackened oak. In the great old-fashioned fireplace, behind the high iron dogs, a log fire crackled and snapped. Sir Henry and I held out our hands to it, for we were numb from our long drive. Then we gazed round us at the high, thin window of old stained glass, the oak paneling, the stags' heads, the coats of arms upon the walls, all dim and somber in the subdued light of the central lamp. "It's just as I imagined it," said Sir Henry. "Is it not the very picture of an old family home? To think that this should be the same hall in which for 500 years my people have lived. It strikes me solemn to think of it." I saw his dark face lit up with a boyish enthusiasm as he gazed about him. The light beat upon him where he stood, but long shadows trailed down the walls and hung like a black canopy above him. Barrymore had returned from taking our luggage to our rooms. He stood in front of us now, with the subdued manner of a well-trained servant. He was a remarkable-looking man, tall, handsome, with a square black beard and pale, distinguished features. "Would you wish dinner to be served at once, sir?" "Is it ready?" "In a very few minutes, sir. You will find hot water in your rooms. My wife and I will be happy, Sir Henry, to stay with you until you have made your fresh arrangements. But you will understand that under the new conditions, this house will require a considerable staff." "What new conditions?" "I only meant, sir, that Sir Charles led a very retired life, and we were able to look after his wants. You would naturally wish to have more company, and so you will need changes in your household." "Do you mean that your wife and you wish to leave?" "Only when it is quite convenient to you, sir." "But your family have been with us for several generations, have they not? I should be sorry to begin my life here by breaking an old family connection." I seemed to discern some signs of emotion upon the butler's white face. "I feel that also, sir, and so does my wife. But to tell the truth, sir, we were both very much attached to Sir Charles, and his death gave us a shock and made these surroundings very painful to us. I fear that we shall never again be easy in our minds at Baskerville Hall." "But what do you intend to do?" "I have no doubt, sir, that we shall succeed in establishing ourselves in some business. Sir Charles's generosity has given us the means to do so. And now, sir, perhaps I had best show you to your rooms." A square balustraded gallery ran round the top of the old hall, approached by a double stair. From this central point, 2 long corridors extended the whole length of the building, from which all the bedrooms opened. My own was in the same wing as Baskerville's, and almost next door to it. These rooms appeared to be much more modern than the central part of the house, and the bright paper and numerous candles did something to remove the somber impression which our arrival had left upon my mind. But the dining room which opened out of the hall was a place of shadow and gloom. It was a long chamber, with a step separating the dais where the family sat from the lower portion reserved for their dependents. At one end a minstrel's gallery overlooked it. Black beams shot across above our heads, with a smoke-darkened ceiling beyond them, with rows of flaring torches to light it up, and the color and rude hilarity of an old-time banquet. It might have softened, But now, when two black-clothed gentlemen sat in the little circle of light thrown by a shaded lamp, one's voice became hushed and one's spirit subdued. A dim line of ancestors in every variety of dress, from the Elizabethan knight to the buck of the Regency, stared down upon us and daunted us by their silent company. We talked little, and I for one was glad when the meal was over and we were able to retire into the modern billiard room and smoke a cigarette. "My word, it isn't a very cheerful place," said Sir Henry. "I suppose one can tone down to it, but I feel a bit out of the picture at present. I don't wonder that my uncle got a little jumpy if he lived all alone in such a house as this. However, if it suits you, we will retire early tonight, and perhaps things may seem more cheerful in the morning." I drew aside my curtains before I went to bed and looked out from my window. It opened upon the grassy space which lay in front of the hall door. Beyond, two copses of trees moaned and swung in a rising wind. A half-moon broke through the rifts of racing clouds. In its cold light, I saw beyond the trees a broken fringe of rocks and the long, low curve of the melancholy moor. I closed the curtain, feeling that my last impression was in keeping with the rest. And yet, it was not quite the last. I found myself weary and yet wakeful, tossing restlessly from side to side, seeking for the sleep which would not come. Far away, a chiming clock struck out the quarters of the hours, but otherwise a deathly silence lay upon the old house. And then, suddenly, in the very dead of the night, there came a sound to my ears, clear, resonant, and unmistakable. It was the sob of a woman, the muffled, strangling gasp of one who is torn by an uncontrollable sorrow. I sat up in bed and listened intently. The noise could not have been far away, and was certainly in the house. For half an hour I waited with every nerve on the alert, but there came no other sound save the chiming clock and the rustle of the ivy on the wall. The end. If you like the story, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was there anything that surprised you? Who's your favorite character in the story? I can't wait to hear your thoughts.